Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and we just received some groundbreaking news in the competitive Pokemon VGC scene. The Regulation D rule set has been announced. It starts in just under a month on July 1st, and this rule set is crazy. It allows for Pokemon from Pokemon Home to be legal. So, that means Pokemon like Thundurus, Tornadus. Also means that this format will be used for the 2023 World Championships. This is unprecedented because for Worlds, normally we just stay within the regional decks. Not only are we moving out of the regional decks, this will also be the very first time where Worlds is going to be the first tournament of a brand new format. So, the next few months are going to look really crazy. To get you all up to speed, I wanted to make this video to cover the rule changes and give you some sense of what you should expect to see from day one of the format. So I hope you find this video helpful. I literally woke up, got out of bed, found out about the news, and I was like, I have to put something together, so I have time. Anyway, let's break things down. Everything is timestamped down below, by the way, if you want to skip along. First of all, a quick summary of the Regulation D rule set. This brand new rule set will allow for non-restricted Pokemon, including those that are transferred from Pokemon Home. The easiest way to think about this is the current Regulation C rule set plus all of the additions from Pokemon Home. Keep in mind that Walking Wake and Iron Leaves, as well as Koraidon and Miraidon, are still not legal in this brand new format. Meanwhile, other Scarlet and Violet raid Pokemon, such as the starter evolutions from previous generations, are legal. Restricted Pokemon include box legendaries such as Kyogre and Zacian, as well as mythical Pokemon such as Celebi and Mew, and of course those are the Pokemon that will still be banned from this format. The dates for Regulation D run from July 1st to September 30th, so it starts about a month from the day that I'm posting this video. This is a really big deal because it's the rule set that the 2023 World Championships will use. And what makes it really wild is that this is the first Worlds ever where Worlds will be the first major of a new format. This is unprecedented in VGC, and it'll make for a really chaotic and interesting World Championships, in my opinion. For those of you that aren't competing at Worlds this summer, this is mainly going to be a format that you'll be playing online, but there might be a couple post-Worlds events in September, such as regionals, that will use this rule set. But throughout the months of July and August, you should mainly be expecting to just play this online for fun and on the ranked ladder. Moving on, I wanted to give some of my immediate thoughts and impressions regarding this change. First of all, I can honestly say that I did not expect this to come so soon. I thought Regulation D would eventually happen, but I would have predicted it to happen after the World Championships, and I would have thought Worlds would have just been Regulation C. The main reason for that is because for a Worlds of a brand new game, we generally stay within the regional decks. So to move on and allow for all of these old Pokemon immediately is already wild. But what's even wilder is, like I mentioned, this is going to be the first major tournament of this format, major tournaments. And so I am really curious to see what rises to the top. Do people spend more time trying to counter the metagame, or do they try to just spend time finding what they think is a really consistent, strong strategy? I can imagine that this change is going to be really stressful and the last three formats have all been somewhat similar to each other, from Series 1 and 2 to Regulation C. This is just going to be a complete twist for everyone competing. I will say for myself personally, I haven't loved Regulation C. I think it's actually still been a really good. I'm really excited, and one thing that I definitely have my eye out on for in this brand new format is speed control. I think that the new additions will enable for a lot more viable modes of speed control, and a lot of these brand new Pokemon that are introduced are some of the most dominant Pokemon in their respective metas and generations. Tornadus and Cresselia are both World Champions, for example, and they get access to Tailwind and Trick Room respectively, and if you played Sword and Shield VGC at all, you'll know just how good Regieleki is for speed control with Electro Web, and it's just so incredibly fast. Regieleki in particular, I'm curious how it's going to interact with Pokemon like Fluttermane as well as Active. I think that interaction in itself is already really interesting. I also am curious about how old Pokemon will interact with new Pokemon. For example, we know Chien-Pao right now is really dominant in Scarlet and Violet VGC. It combos really nicely with physical attackers like Dragonite, but what about Urshifu? How is it going to pair when you have these old Pokemon that can take advantage of these new... I think about something like Cresselia, which would be really weak to Fluttermane's Shadow Ball or Urshifu's Wicked Blow, for example, but a single Terra can get around that weakness, allow you to set up Trick Room, and then go from there. I personally think Terra has been an... Moving on, I wanted to share a graphic that shows all of the Pokemon you can currently transfer to Scarlet and Violet via the Pokemon Home update. A huge thank you to Munching Orange for putting this together and sharing it on Twitter. I've linked his Twitter down in the description below. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the upcoming DLC will likely introduce more Pokemon, but that's not scheduled until fall 2023, so I wouldn't expect it to be relevant for Regulation D in particular. Note that this list includes all transferable Pokemon, so like I mentioned earlier, box legendaries and mythical Pokemon will be banned from the format. If you are curious about what Pokemon is legal and what Pokemon is banned, Serebii has a page, which I've linked out in the description below as well, called the Season 8 Ranked Battle page, that separates all of these into legal and non-legal. So, yeah, I figured this would be a good image for any of those that are curious which Pokemon you can actually transfer from home at the moment. Moving on, I wanted to cover old Pokemon that I think you should be paying attention to. Now, this list isn't exhaustive by any means, but I think that this list covers mainly Pokemon that you're going to see at a very frequent rate in day one of this format. If you've played or followed VGC before, then I don't think these Pokemon should be really too surprising to you because they've all been really good in their respective formats, and many of the Pokemon on this list are World Champions as well. We have to, of course, start off with the Genies in Tornadus, Landorus, and Thundurus. These Pokemon have all been so good. They've all won World Championships before, and I think they'll continue to be really solid in Regulation D. Tornadus, of course, for speed control, Landorus for intimidate. Cresselia and Heatran are two of my all-time favorite Pokemon. I used them at the 2013 World Championships, as well as the 2012 World Championships, and Cresselia just continues to be a solid Trick Room user. Heatran continues to be a solid damage dealer, and with Terra, I think now you can cover for that 4x weakness to ground as well. The bottom row covers, of course, brand new Pokemon introduced throughout Sword and Shield. Regieleki was everywhere throughout Sword and Shield. It was so fast, and of course gets access to speed control via Electro Web. Urshifu, both forms, I think will be really solid, and Urshifu actually gets access to Swords Dance now as well, making it really scary. Rillaboom usage, I think, will decrease relative to Sword and Shield. I mean, this Pokemon was everywhere in Sword and Shield, but it lost access to a lot of moves. That being said, I still think it is a fundamentally solid Fake Out user, and Fake Out has more value in this generation than in Sword and Shield because Dynamax, of course, is no longer a thing. And finally, you've got Glastrier and Spectrier. Glastrier, I actually have my eye out on in particular because of Abomasnow and just Snow in general, giving the defense boost to Ice-type Pokemon. And Spectrier, of course, can just deal a lot of damage as well. And even though it's frail, I think Focus Sash variants like we had seen previously, or even maybe Choice Specs or Choice Scarf, for example, can be interesting. So I definitely expect all of these Pokemon to be used starting from day one in the format, and you should prepare for them accordingly. Now that we've talked about the old Pokemon, I wanted to briefly summarize a couple of really relevant buffs and nerfs. I put this together because I think it's always a little bit tricky to orient yourself with old Pokemon in a brand new generation, because naturally a lot of us are inclined to use them the exact same way we had used them previously. By the way, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's actually a really excellent starting point, but I think it's also important to learn what new tricks a lot of these Pokemon get access to now. The first one is the Genies. This one blew my mind when I found out about it because the Genies have already been so dang good in VGC, but they now all get access to a brand new signature special spread attack. These attacks are 100 base power and 80% in accuracy, and all of them have a potential secondary effect as well. Tornadus has a 30% chance to lower opposing speeds by one stage, Thundurus has a 20% chance to paralyze each target, and Landorus has a 20% chance to burn each target. All of these moves are interesting because they're obviously solid base power, but the accuracy makes them a little bit inconsistent. However, the secondary effects, of course, are very appealing. Landorus in particular I'm interested in because historically Landorus Therian has primarily been physical, but we have seen special sets that utilize Earth Power and Hidden Power Ice back when that was a thing. Landorus Incarnate in particular has used special sets a lot throughout the years. I personally used a mix set with Earth Power HP Ice Stone Edge at the 2015 US National Championships. So Landorus has primarily been physical, but some people have used special, making sense for some already somewhat interesting. But the other thing is that Landorus now gets access to nasty plots, so suddenly special sets I think become even more viable on this Pokemon. Obviously the accuracy is not amazing, but the burn chance I think is really solid, and being able to burn any Pokemon is very nice. So having a 20% chance to burn either target I think is awesome. Moving on from the Genies, Cresselia now gets access to a brand new signature attack in Lunar Blessing, which heals you and your partner by 25%, and it also cures status conditions. Cresselia gets access to a pretty deep move pool, including offensive attacks like Psychic-type attacks such as Psyshock or Psychic, as well as Ice Beam, but having another supportive move like Lunar Blessing I think is really nice, and I can see a lot of Cresselia players using it. Other than that, we've also got a bunch of brand new move additions. Urshifu now gets access to Sword Stance, which I think makes it really threatening. Sword Stance and then being able to just ignore Protect sounds terrifying. Spectrier gets access to Draining Kiss, Landorus gets access to Taunt, Heatran gets access to Power Jam, and Regieleki gets access to Charge Beam. Those are all Pokemon that I had covered previously, and I wanted to just include one note in that Uxie, Azelf, and Mesprit now get access to a new signature attack in Mystical Power, which is 70 base power, it's a special move, and it increases your special attack by 1 guaranteed. Honestly, none of these three have been very relevant in VGC at all throughout their existence, and I don't really expect them to be super meta relevant, especially given just the amount of massive weaknesses that they have, and I think Cresselia often fulfills their role better, and there are other Trick Room users that fulfill their role better, for example. That being said, I think if you do want to use these three, Mystical Power is a really intriguing move. A lot of old Pokemon have also received really relevant nerfs. Glastrier now loses access to high horsepower, which is a pretty big deal. In the previous generation, having high horsepower allowed it to hit fire-type Pokemon, which otherwise resist Glacial Lance for super effective damage. Speaking of Glacial Lance, the damage is decreased now by 10 base power, going from 130 to 120. Heatran has now lost access to Eruption and Toxic. Toxic's not super VGC relevant, but Eruption is a huge deal. Eruption Heatran was one of the most dominant sets, especially in VGC 2013. I brought it to the World Championships that year. So you don't have to worry as much about a Sun-boosted Fire Terra Choice Specs Eruption, for example. Rillaboom really got nerfed. It lost access to Grassy Glide as well as high horsepower and superpower. For those reasons, I'm actually curious how relevant it'll be in this brand new generation, because this Pokemon was obviously everywhere in the previous gen, but having Fake Out in general is still really solid, and it still gets access to some decent moves. Cresselia's defenses have finally been nerfed by 10. I kind of laughed when I saw this because I felt like this was way overdue, given how good Cresselia's been throughout the years. So defense and special defense going from 120 and 130 respectively to 110 and 120. And finally, Wicked Blow's damage output has been decreased by 5 base power, going from 80 to 75. Shifting gears now, I wanted to show a list of brand new Pokemon that I've seen a lot of VGC players talk about. I've seen a couple of tier lists from respectable players, and a lot of these Pokemon are higher up on the tier lists. The one thing that I want to add here is that you should honestly learn and study all of the brand new Pokemon from Legends Arceus. I think with brand new Pokemon, it's really easy to underestimate something and just not really have any experience fighting against it. And one of the easiest ways to lose in competitive VGC is to just not really know what a Pokemon does and have it completely catch you off guard. So I know for me personally, I will be memorizing all the brand new Pokemon, what their typings are, their base stats, and what the most notable moves on all of them are. That being said, I've selected 10 here in particular that I've seen a lot of players talk about more frequently than the other Pokemon. But just because I have not included a Pokemon here does not mean you should just completely ignore it or underestimate it. It'll really do you good to just study up on all of them and memorize their typings and all of those other attributes that I talked about earlier. I think the three that actually draw my eye the most on this list are Ursaluna and the Enamorus forms. I think the rest all have a lot of potential viability, and I'm not going to dive into the specifics in this video, but I just think that those others you definitely should be paying attention to. That being said, I'm really interested in Ursaluna and Enamorus mainly because of its ability, Contrary, and Ursaluna, I think so many people have been hyping up this Pokemon. I haven't played with it yet, but just given the replays that I've watched and the hype that I've seen around it, I think it warrants actually a bigger discussion because this Pokemon will be super meta relevant immediately. So pay attention to these, start studying them. But like I mentioned, your list should be a little bit more exhaustive and you really should just try to get up to speed with all of the Hisuian Pokemon. If there's one Pokemon you really should prepare for, it's Ursaluna. Everyone in the VGC scene has been talking about this Pokemon and they've really been hyping it up. We'll have to see whether or not it actually lives up to the hype, but I think on day one, Ursaluna teams, with Trick Room in particular, are going to be everywhere. I'm personally excited to try out a team around it, so I wanted to get you up to speed with why people are hyping this Pokemon up. First of all, its base stats are really solid. 140 attack is one of the highest in the game, and you have 130 HP, 105 defense, 80 special defense, which is a pretty solid defensive split as well. In addition, it gets access to Guts as an ability, so you can't just burn it with Will-O-Wisp and reduce its damage output. I think Flame Orb in particular will be a common item on this Pokemon just to increase your damage output in particular, but I don't think you only have to use the Guts set, I just think that that's what people will default to earlier on. This Pokemon's move pool is absolutely wild. It gets so many strong normal, fighting, ground, and rock type attacks, and it gets really good coverage across the board. You can see Play Rough, Crunch, Ice Fire, and Thunder Punch, Shadow Claw, Avalanche, Seed Bomb. This Pokemon I feel like gets access to so many good attacks. In addition to that, it can even boost its stats. It's got Belly Drum, Swords Dance, and Bulk Up, so it can further increase its attack, which makes it even scarier. Can you imagine a normal or ground terror on this with Guts plus Flame Orb plus an attack boost from one of those boosting attacks? That sounds like a nightmare to fight against. It also gets some nice utility in Helping Hand and Taunt. I'd be really surprised to see those other than on really niche teams, just because I think this should be the primary damage dealer, but this sounds like a really scary Pokemon to fight against. I could see Flame Orb being common. Maybe you'll use something like a Choice Band or Life Orb, for example, just for more consistent damage and not relying on taking a turn to get the burn, for example. But I think this is really scary, and I think it synergizes so nicely with Trick Room in particular, especially Trick Room users like Cresselia, Bronzong, and even a Ranguru, for example. That being said, I don't think you have to pigeonhole it into Trick Room. I think it can be used outside of it, but this is a Pokemon that you will definitely see on day one, and you should be adequately prepared or at least know what to expect from it. So to conclude, you might be wondering, okay, how do I actually start preparing now? Where do I go from here? I've got a month left before this format officially starts. The first thing I recommend is to get up to speed with how people have built old Pokemon in past generations, because that'll give you a decent sense of how people will utilize them in the brand new games. What I mean by that is, say you're new to VGC, you join in Scarlet and Violet, and you don't really know that much about Pokemon like Cresselia, Landorus T, Heatran, Urshifu, Regieleki. Check out some previous VODs, tournament replays, videos of how people have built around those Pokemon. Maybe watch some of the old World Championships as well, to get a sense of how those Pokemon were used at a high level. I think that it's really important to learn about all the new Pokemon from Legends Arceus. As I mentioned earlier, I showcased 10 Pokemon that I think people are talking about more and maybe might be used more frequently, but you should really just learn all of them. That's something that I know I'll be doing personally, because I expect to be losing to a lot of those Pokemon, and I want to just get a sense of what the main strategies around them are. I think it's really easy to underestimate brand new Pokemon and not show them respect, and I think that's one of the easiest ways to lose in VGC as well. So just get up to speed with all of the Pokemon from that region. I think you should also start thinking about new strategies that these Pokemon can enable, and you really should take into account the brand new moves that these Pokemon get, as well as the new items such as Covert Cloak or Clear Amulet that were introduced in this generation, and of course think about Terra and other mechanic changes as well. I've included a couple here. For example, Tornadus, I think, should be one of the default Tailwind users if you're thinking about Tailwind. Covert Cloak in particular, making it immune to Fake Out means you don't have to spend a moveset on Protect, which is really nice. Of course, it gets a brand new signature move as well. Cresselia gets Lunar Blessing and has always been a good Trick Room user, but with Terra, you can now get around a lot of those super effective hits as well. Enamorus, as I mentioned, with Contrary, I think is really interesting, especially thanks to side Eerie Impulse from something like Thundurus or Regieleki. Both of those Pokemon loved using Eerie Impulse in the previous generation. Ursaluna, I've talked a lot about already, so I don't think I really need to elaborate any further, but expect this Pokemon to be everywhere on day one. And Glastrier, I think, for example, is also interesting, where now, because of the changes to Hail, aka Snow, you can get a defense boost from it, and Abomasnow plus Glastrier under Trick Room, I think, sounds like a really interesting combination as well. The last thought I want to leave you with is that Worlds is going to be the first event of this format officially. The metagame progression is going to look really different. Normally, metagames evolve because of in-person tournaments, but with no actual major tournaments happening before Worlds, we're going to have a solid 5-6 week window with this format where a lot of the top players are not really going to be talking about their strategies publicly because, of course, their goal is to win the World Championships. So my advice is don't be afraid to try out anything that intrigues you. If there's any Pokemon that you think is cool, any strategy that you think is cool, it's the wild, wild west at the start of a brand new format, and a lot of people are going to take a lot of time to get up to speed and really just learn about what works and what doesn't work. So I encourage you to just explore things that interest you. Don't think about building around the meta as much, and just think about what you think might be fun or might be strong and try to figure out how to build a cohesive strategy around that. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope that it was helpful. This is a really crazy rule change, so I'm curious to see how it impacts VGC and obviously the World Championships this summer, and I'm excited to dive into it with all of you in the upcoming weeks and months. So thanks as always for watching. Leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. All right, peace.